Yeah, hi. If you haven't met me before, Bryan Jepsen. I have been on the IAQA, so Indoor Air Quality Australia Committee for 5 years. I don't know how long. I'm currently serving as a secretary. And I've also been on the ASBB committee for probably just as long. What do you reckon, Kelly? Sorry, I've got my
Maybe
so
longer.
I've got my little
No.
laptop screen here. I've got the mic, the camera here, so you can see this, so you get a bit of context of what's going on. So I don't know where to look. But yeah. So I've been in it for a little while. Uh, been in the mold game for probably about 10 years, I reckon, 10 years now, in some capacity. But when it comes to the laboratory side of things, probably 5 years. And I've moved certain companies. So at first I learned under Claire Bird, and then I worked with Dr. Heike Newmeister Kemp, who wrote the Australian Mold Guideline. Only lasted a year. And then I started my own business. And in those, so I started two businesses at the same time. I started the consulting arm and also the laboratory arm with my business partner at the time, Victoria Samios, who is still a legend. However, she's decided to go off and study or specialize more in gut health. So the bacteria side of her microbiology side. So she probably taught me the most, I have to say. She was great. And is great. We're still friends. We still talk every now and then. She's currently in New Zealand. But thank you for joining us, everyone who's on the call. This is a bit unscripted, to be truthful. I've got things to show, and we're just going to generally talk. So if you feel like there's anything that you might want to just throw in there, go for it. Otherwise, I'm just going to talk, because I could probably sit here for about 10 hours. And there's some really good looking people on the chat right now, and I know I'm married, and also into my wife. There are some attractive dudes, so if we want to chat, we can chat. So just throw anything at me, but until then, I'm just gonna start. Probably 3 weeks ago, I'm not sure if any of you got the opportunity to join, but Nicole also put a bit of a paid mentorship opportunity where we did a bit of a roundtable with a lot of the laboratories around, and lots of cool topics came up. It was a bit of a nerd fest, to be honest. But if you were there, hello again. We're going to cover off on something that's a little bit different, and yeah. So first thing I'm going to do is, if you're not familiar with the sampling, which you probably all are, otherwise you wouldn't be here, is I'm going to start getting some cassettes that you're probably familiar with, right? So you've got the aerosol over here, and this, if you've not seen it before, is the Allergenco. They're the same pretty well in most every way. The Allergenco has changed the funnel a little bit, and it's slightly more efficient according to some studies. But this is a hard area to be very concise on, so that remains to be, to me anyway. It's not remarkably different, so they're both very good products. What they also offer in the Allergenco, so the Allergenco really speaks to the inlet that they've got here. However, you've got the post-track type here. I can open that up and show you. There's nothing inside of it, but you can open it up, and that's how we get the slide out. Now, inside of the cassette types, we open them up. That's just the same as the post-track there, only it's got a really thin, small piece of gel on a glass slide, which we mount onto another glass slide, and then we put another glass slide on top, a few glass slides. And but inside of so for that, you'll get something that looks like this. I don't know how well you can see these things. Tell me what's good, what's bad. But you'll get something like that in the end. There you go. I'll put it against the black. I don't even know if I've got something black. That was a really good idea that I didn't think about. So that's what you'll get from an aerosol, but from the post-track, or posi-track they call it, it comes as a slide. inside of it, which is why it's really long and elongated. So it saves us in the lab mounting to another slide. So the gel is directly onto the slide, and you can just, now I've been told that I shouldn't be saying this, but you can do it, is you can keep the cassette and replace the slide and clock that in, and it clicks. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. And you'll know it's locked in. And then you can interchange them. So you don't, it's not a single use. These aren't, where these are single use, you just, the lab will open them up and cut them and throw them away. Where you have the opportunity to take these and you can ship inside of these slides here, and you can put the slides in there. I don't know if you can see that. So they can all, there's 5 that can fit into this particular one, boom, and you can send it off. So long as you've got your chain of custody filled out and everything like that accurately, in my opinion, I think you can keep on doing that and save a fair ton of money. But I'm still playing with it and seeing how that goes for myself. So yeah, but that's how I do things on that side of things. I've taken a couple of samples, and I've also got a couple of samples from MJ on these weapons. If you've ever seen them before, the AML stickers. This is how you'll all see them. Now this is mounted, so I've actually put a die on it already so that I can start to see some stuff on there. So we're going to have a look at that, because what she did was we did a job together. She could probably talk about it. And there were some leftover Petri dishes when we did some agar plates. I've got some in the fridge, but I'll show you those. But everyone has the idea of what they're called, right? And then what they look like. They're just the scientific plates where things grow on. There were some leftover plates, and she took them home and stuck them in various places just to see what would happen, and gave me a couple of samples. So I thought I'd show them today. I'm not sure if she's on with us today, but she could probably talk to where they came from and why she did it.
Hello.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, hey. So we're going to cover some of those things and look at it under the microscope. I will have to share my screen. I did try and be real fancy about it, but it didn't work. So forgive me. I'm going to have to do it a bit of a janky way. Close that. Yeah, any questions straight out of the gate, I suppose, before we start looking at stuff? Bring up the chat if there's anyone in the chat. No questions? Cool. Okay, let's get nerdy. Share my screen, and we're going to go to, let's do that one. Okay, can you all see this? It's just a pretty plain old white screen, right? I'm going to jump onto this posi track that I showed you earlier. Now this came from a beautiful specimen called my old freezer. I opened it up the other day, and it nearly knocked me down. It was terrible. So we've got the different here. If you can see these things, I've got different lenses. This is a 10x, a 40x, and a 60 over here. And I can flip them over, and you can start to see some beautiful things. So this is what it's like when we first get the slide and we stick it on. What we're trying to do is look for deposits and what it would generally present as we're going to start analyzing the sample. So we'll scan along, we'll move along, and I hope you can see all that. And I don't even know if you can see my face, but that was useless me showing you the posi track if that's the case. Anyway, so we've got these here. Let's follow this one. So this is a broken piece of hyphae, really large, because it come from my freezer. I don't know what to do with it. I'm certainly not going to use it again, but I don't know what to do with it. So it's just sitting there as a beautiful specimen, and you get a little bit nerdy about it. So you can see here, this has all the little squiggly worms. Can you see that clearly? Just give me a thumbs up, Kelly, or someone. Yeah, cool.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So you can see some small squiggly stuff. So this is at 10 times the human eyesight right now, but this isn't where we analyze it from. So we're just scanning here to have a general look at what's going on. So to analyze it, we go to the 40 times. So that's this one here. Let me get it in focus. So 10 points to the person who can tell me what these might be called. No one?
Conidiophores?
Yeah, well, yes, they are. Good. Yeah, well, I'll give you 10 points. Can you tell me the genus of what this might be? So the type.
Would it be clad?
Yeah, okay, right, there we go. So right in the middle, I'll zoom right and I'll do this 60 times. So right in the middle is the larger ones there that are slightly different color. Those are actually cladosporium. However, you have the smaller ones. Those are aspen. This is what it looks like under the microscope. Now, we typically don't look at it at 60x because it's unnecessary, because we can clearly see it with the 40. In our lab, we do it at 40x. That's where we count and we review everything at 40 times. Some labs claim to do it at 60 times, but as you can see, it doesn't really change a lot for us. It just means that the lab has to count a heck of a lot more. What's hard to see is I put it back up to the 10x. This is probably not the best sample. Hopefully we've got one that can tell. So I'm going to take it off and I'm going to try and talk to you a little bit about it. So as you know that these have the slit, right? They've got the slit in there and it deposits onto the slide in a very rectangle thin layer. So it's a very thin rectangle. This isn't the best to see it because they're so hyaline or translucent. So we call it hyaline in the nerdy world. And so we'll go back. So we'll go back and it feathers out. So it's really thick in a set spot, and then it sort of feathers out a little bit where it's not so dense. And what we do is we go, so if you have the rectangle like this, get my face out of the way, we go up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down through the trace of the slide. So then what happens after that, I'll share my screen again, so this is at 10x, and hopefully you'll be able to see that as I move towards the center of it, it gets a bit more dense and then it comes away. It's pretty hard. Actually, you know what? I'll change the phase. You might be able to see it a bit better in a different filter. Here we go. Okay, here we go. So this is a different filter. We don't really look at it using this filter, but it's really good for this description. So you can see how it's all feathered out. Now, if I come down, it'll get more and more dense. More and more dense, as you can see. And then as we come through it again, it'll start feathering out. So it'll start lightening up again. So that's how we go through it. We go up and down, up and down, up and down, all the way through. Oh, that's 60. So if we go to the 40, this has still got the filter on it. So you've got some clad on the right-hand side, 1, 2, 3 of them, and then the rest are Aspergillus penicillium. Now, I would hazard to say, let me look at it under the microscope, change back to the other one. That these are here's a really good one. Might show its maturity a little bit. I'll try and show you, because it is possible to see if they're rough or smooth. Now you can sort of see it in the camera. Trying to get into focus, but you can see a little bit of roughness. They're not smooth, all of them. There is one large one in the center, slightly off to the right, down the bottom. It's quite smooth, whereas the others, they're a bit more rough, so it's quite likely that's Aspergillus, not Penicillium. Penicillium classically has quite smooth conidiophore or spores, and so it can be, you can tell the difference under the microscope to some degree of confidence with where that's at. Any questions so far before I carry on? No?
Sorry, yes, I have a question.
Yep.
Yeah, so just with debris and stuff like that,
Yep.
what's do you have any tips for things like that? Because we were chatting the other day about, if you do it near a busy road, you see,
Yeah.
what's the go with that? Like tips for people for best places to give samples, or what else you're seeing in
That's
there?
hard. Yeah, sometimes you don't know. Now, the beautiful part about the posi track is that you're opening it and you can see whether the line inside that's on the gel is really thick or not. And so you can judge, especially for in-wall samples. Outside air is not too much of a big deal, but especially in walls or in roof cavities, whether you sampled for too long. And without too much of a great expense, you can change that, which is one of the benefits of the posi track. However, in a fixed cell cassette, you're never going to tell, because the moment you open that, you compromise it. And I wouldn't suggest that that's a good idea because you've tampered with it. What I've got here, hopefully, is an outside air that might show us something. No, it's boring. Okay, that's no help to anybody. But I can show you something else that's interesting. Okay, so here we go. So this is an outdoor air sample. You can see this big chunky thing right here, right? That's some fiber off something from somewhere. No idea where that would have come from. Now it is a bit blue because the stain that we use has a blue hint to it, just to give a bit of color to some of the spores that are otherwise translucent. Doesn't work for Cladosporium, as you can see there, but this is the debris that you'll see. So you'll get this kind of debris. I'll try and lighten that up a little bit. And you got a little spore right in the middle there, Nasco spore. So, and a little aspen right at the top there, a little tiny guy. But this is the debris. This is the sort of stuff that you'll get in an outside air. So it's not really too abundant. I don't know if I have an example for you where debris will be crazy in an outdoor air. Yeah, so that part's hard. And you just don't know on site. Just classically will not know. So here, that's Cladosporium. So that's a clump of Cladosporium. So sometimes when you get a lab report, there can be one of this in the sample, and the rest of it be absent entirely of any other of the same species. But you get quite a large number because it just stuck together in one big group. When they group together, that can mean that there's potentially some local growth that it's captured because it hasn't broken itself off into individual pieces. But yeah, you've got here, this is Cladosporium and a cluster of it. If you have questions about viable sampling, happy to chat about it, because this is an important image to remember if we're going to chat about it. Yeah, it's a pretty absent. So this place, I can tell you, was on the Gold Coast and pretty close to the ocean. So kind of empty. There's a big old, if I can, yeah, it's way there we go. Big chunk of stuff, but that's on another level to where we're looking. Yeah, anyway, so that's a bit of a nothing burger for us. And that's the complicated part. You never know. You never know if you've got a great outdoor air sample or not to get some sort of idea. But it's better to have it than not. In scenarios where you don't have it, there are guidelines that might be able to help you. So the guy who developed the aerosol, this guy, this type here. Oh, you can't see me because I'm sharing my screen. Let me stop the share. So this one here, the guy who developed that, his name is Dan Baxter, him and a few others. He's a real numbers guy, a real nerdy fella. He's pretty cool. If you want to reach out to him, he'll answer questions. But he also developed he did a study in 2021 to try and establish, at least in the US, what's normal for outdoor air and what you should expect in proportions and things like that. Really cool one. So that's the Environmental Analysis Association document. So if you don't have that, look up Dan Baxter and type EEA guideline. I reckon you'll find it. Any disadvantages yet that you've observed with the PosiTrack? Disadvantages? Yes, there are some disadvantages. You have to be careful. You have to be very careful with this compared to the aerosol or the cassette types. Because with the PosiTrack, if you can send this in by itself if you want to. There's no dramas in doing that at all. But you're the one that's going to be opening this up. So you've got to wear gloves, you've got to be careful, and you've got to pick it up and you've got to slide it into the thing. Make sure it's marked. It has a barcode and a barcode number on it. Oh yeah, I don't know if you can see that very well. Probably not because my face is there, it's recognizing me. But it's got a barcode on there, and it sits in here comfortably. It's not a difficult thing to move and replace, so it sits in here just fine, just like this. And then you put the lid back on. So you're getting your hands involved. So it's a little bit more, when you're on site, it's a bit more fiddly.
But there's a lot of waste with the aerosols, a lot of waste, plastic.
Yeah, there is. And it's recyclable, if that makes anyone feel better. So these are number 6 on that one. What type is this? I don't know what number the aerosol is. But they're recyclable. So that's a saving grace. But when it comes to wastage, it's pretty big. You know, like if you were to do it this way, you can save a fair bit of money. But the offset of your time trying to fiddle around with these things, that's up to you. It's up to you.
Are you saying that they're designed for one use only? They don't tell you that you can replace them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they say that they don't warrant it. So they don't support it in any of their literature that you do this. And what they say is that it just helps the lab. So you're doing a favor to the lab. But at the end of the day, the cassette doesn't change at all. It fits straight onto every other pump that you have. If you have a Buck, for example, the same people who make the Buck make these. They also have what's called a bio slide, which is a pump that you can just stick the PosiTrack straight onto. And then you close the lid of the pump and then the pump sucks straight onto it without the cassette type harness inside of it. So they don't support that you do that. However, I don't really see anything wrong with it so long as your handling method is good. You stick it into the protective case that you've got here. There's 5 slots. I'd probably only use 3 just to be sure, but each one of these comes with its own case. So that's a bit of wastage if you wanted to. And then you can write on the top if it's just a single sample. Or you can go 1, this, through, however you choose to do it to help you know what's in what. But the important part's your chain of custody for that.
So would you open it up in the environment that you did the air sampling? So if you did an outdoor sample, would you not then bring it inside, open it up in an indoor environment? Because then could that interfere with your
that's one of
results?
that's one of the downfalls of using this is there is risk of contamination, but it's almost no different if the lab did it. You know, we don't for direct microscopy. you don't need a protective biological safety cabinet like you do with the viable samples with the agar, because it's all bound to the gel. Now, when it comes to cross-contamination from the environment, it's pretty low unless you're going to be waving it around to make it impact onto the gel. So it's very low that you're going to get any settled issues. But that's something to consider, definitely. It's not for everyone, and that's why these things are great. But I'm just showing this to let you know that there are other things out there, not just this. And I happen to have a couple of these. So yeah. MJ, we have, so a blank sample could be good to add in. Yeah, especially, yeah, absolutely. So it's never a bad idea. However, some labs will charge for the analysis of a blank sample, some don't. Have a chat to your lab about that. But when it comes to these things and the PosiTrack, it's a good idea, most definitely. What MJ's talking about there is if you have a field blank sample to put in with it, because if your field blank sample is the control of what might be contaminated, so what you do is you'll pull the slide out of its case, and then you'll just leave it on wherever. You can leave it on top of the case and just leave it with the gel side up for the time that it would take you to take it out and stick it in. So it wouldn't be very long, just to get an idea of what zero might look like, so that if this does come back contaminated, then you know to deduct whatever the difference is, if that helps anyone understand. Did I say that right, MJ? Did I make that clear? Cool, thank you. So yeah, in that scenario, a field blank is a must. You can't not. Now, in the field, when it comes to these pre-made ones, now these they come off the shelf, right? They will come with certificates of efficacy off the line. Now you can do batch samples if you wanted to save some money, so 1 in every 50 box. You could do that as a way to sort of do it and use that attached to all of your reports. However, because they're made in such a clean environment, I'm yet to find one that's compromised. Let's put it that way, when a field blank gets done. So if you get charged for it, that's an expense for what value is very low. But when it comes to legal jobs, for example, you get a lot of weight that comes behind it when you do a field blank. Yeah. Okay. So that's the air sample side of things. What are we doing? We're half an hour through. I'm jibber-jabbering too much. Okay, we'll go quickly. So what I'm going to show you really quick is some samples that MJ took. Yeah. Okay. So this is the yumminess that MJ took. Go away. There you are. So this is the plate. And this is number 1. All right, so I'm going to get the number 1 slide. So you can see where the sample was taken from. And you might ask very quickly as well, do I like the AML stickers? No, I don't. They're trash. But they can sort of do the job. But this is an exact example why the stickers are no good. So you see these bubbles here? This happens on the stickers. It doesn't happen as bad on sellotape, but these stickers, because they're so thick and rigid, they just lock air pockets in for good, and it's sometimes terrible to look at. And if there is a bunch of debris, it is near impossible for us to look at. So sometimes you just throw it away. That's what it's worth anyway. So we do our best, but it's not great. So this here, MJ, to let you know, is cladosporium. But this is what it looks like straight off a colony using that sticker. That's not cladosporium. So you can see the hyphae or of the cladosporium, but then you have the other guys. Now, they don't come from a conidial head like aspen normally does. It's actually probably immature. Now, this could be Cladosporium spherosporum. Which becomes very circular, like aspen, similar size. However, because we have a lot of the hyphae around this type here, it gives it away that it's Cladosporium. Try and find some interesting. But yeah, you can see all the bubbles and stuff, and it doesn't show up really well. What I'll do right now is I'll swap over to my fridge again, but on the outside of that same fridge. Now this, I believe, is Cladosporium. I haven't looked at it for a very long time. But you might be able to see the difference between the sticker, what happens on a sticker, and what happens on a mold tape slide. Can you see how clear it is? Much more clear it is? Oh no, that's terrible. Sorry, I haven't been looking at the screen. It's probably been looking terrible for you guys. So you can see here that there's no bubbles in it like the sticker does. So on the lab side of things, it is much easier for us to get our head around. So this is Cladosporium on the side of a freezer.
Bryan, how do you go about counting the spores?
Fantastic question. This is part of the reason why I wanted to show you. Now, this one screen here, right? Some laboratories will offer a count. Now, you don't need to be, if you can, identifying it is one thing, okay? But counting it is a different thing. When you have growth of mold, this is what it looks like. It's messy. There's no one clear spore necessarily. You know, there are, you can see them. However, they're all the same genus. They're from the same sample. It is fungi. So the laboratories who offer to count are either magicians or they're making it up, because not every sample is possible to count the spores unless it's potentially around a condition 2, condition 1 area. At that point, you could probably argue that you can count. However, if you look at this, no person is going to go and count this. That would be the time to do that, and the inaccuracy would be phenomenally huge. What I'll look at down here, this might be able to help us a little bit too. It's not, this is very old and desiccated and not a nice presentation. But either way, I think you can get the idea why counting is not trustworthy on a surface sample. Airs are much more possible. However, on a surface sample, this is what we get to look at. And I'm trying to see if there's some hyphae around. So that blue stuff right there, that's skin cells, if anyone cares to know.
Would there be an AI coming out that can count it?
Great question again. Yes. So I am looking to get an AI microscope to do that. Thank you for the question. Yes. However, it's still in a bit of refinement at the moment, but I should. They keep postponing me. So I've been waiting for about 3 months, but I hope to get it before Christmas. As for counting on a surface, even the AI doesn't do it. Now, the AI tech is come a long way in the last 3-4 years since I first saw it. It's come a very long way. However, what the AI does for a surface, and I don't like it, so I'm not going to implement it necessarily for a lot of surface samples, because I'd rather do that by eye. However, what it does do is it'll go, was there evidences of growth? Now, evidences of growth can be the conidial head, which looks like a flower. If you were to imagine a tree, for example, or a flower, a dandelion is probably really good. So they look like a dandelion that's intact, and then the spores are the little seeds that run off it. So that's an option. Another way of them looking at growth is if it's got hyphae, and then another evidence is an abundance of spores. So that's what the AI will do, but the AI will not count it even. So if a computer can't do it, why would we anticipate that a human can? So if your laboratory does count it, I would personally run away. Not a fan. So this one here that we're showing here is another one of MJ's one. It's a bit better for when it comes to air pockets. But you can see the hyphal fragments there. They look like roots. And this is another cladosporium one. This is a great cladosporium one. So, you know, this is one field of view. Other laboratories will look at, they might say that they do 100% of the sample. Others will do a certain percentage or something like that, or whatever. We look at 40 fields of view, so 40 of these. And I don't know about you, but I would quit my job day one if this is what I had to do 40 times for one sample. And to do it accurately would be damn near impossible. The other part to your question is this hyphal fragment. So you see this big one that goes from top to bottom. You can see that it extends past the field of view. My question to labs that do counting is, how do you count this? Now, is it one and you follow it all the way along until it finishes? Oh, but what happens here when it splits and branches off? What are you going to do? How do you count that? Is that 5? Is it 10? Or do you just go 1, 2, 3? Do you count how many seconds it takes you to pass it? There's no way you can count that as 1. But what you can do is you can say it's an evidence of growth. You don't need to be fancy about it. You don't need to count it or try and be a hero. Try and get AI to do it. It's just not possible. So does that answer your question, James?
Yeah, it's just we put so much weight on, you know, the count.
Yeah, absolutely.
Outdoor versus indoor. So
yeah.
any legal sort of person would just, if they knew all this, they would just refute everything, right?
So this is a surface sample, just to let you know. This is not an air sample. So if they were to look at the count of a surface sample, then yes, that would be, and it is easy to get them kicked out of court. As an expert witness, it's easy to refute that. And all you have to do is show them a sample like this. So yeah. But when it comes to airs are a bit more isolated. So if I bring it back to the sample inside the freezer, so now you can see here that it's a bit clearer. It's not as messy. There's no hyphae. You can count this. It's painful to count this many, but I did it. This is a 6-minute sample inside a very contaminated freezer. I just wanted to get a really cool sample for you guys. But we have to count from top to bottom, and we have to do that at least 12. Well, depends on how your lab's set up, but you know, we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Counting. You end up at thousands in this particular sample, thousands in one pass. And classically, we'll do 14 of these to get 50%. Well, our lab does 14 passes of these to give you an example, because after 50%, it's going to be pretty homogeneous. So not much is going to change. You can, however, in this particular sample, we would stop at 300. 300 counts. What we do one, we do one pass of it, so we count everything in one pass, and if it exceeds 300, we stop there. Because from that point on, not much is going to change in the way for you to make a judgment call that that's contaminated. The extra value that you get from us doing more counting is extraordinarily limited. Because if you got a count of 100,000 in one pass, like technically once the algorithm counts it out, then it doesn't change for you. 100,000 is a lot. Your recommendations as a consultant doesn't change. You know, at 10,000 of, you know, depending on where it is, outside's slightly different conversation, but typically indoors, if you see 10,000 equivalent spores, it's a problem. Now, is it worth us continuing counting on any different to get it more accurate than 10,000? 10,204 doesn't change much, because the algorithm will extrapolate the traverse. So it still extrapolates it out to a meter cubed. So that part doesn't change. So that's the air sample. So on the air sample, you can see that it's possible to count. Whereas on a surface sample, the character of the mold is way more important.
Sorry, Bryan. So on your report, once you do the analysis, like you would say, you know, presence of mold, like growth and species?
Yeah, so I'll cover off on I'll go through our lab report just to show you how we do it. And I'll answer those sort of questions. And one of the bonus parts was to be able to see a sample like that and show you why we don't count, because it's mycologically untrue. Yeah.
And going back to the sample itself, you said that like tape lift creates all that bubble. So what do you suggest to use instead of that?
So yeah, to use a bio tape. So that's from Zephon. They come the pre-made sticky. I'll stop sharing my screen for a sec. So this is the bio tape. You can sort of see that. And then you've got the mold tape slide, almost exactly the same, different brand. So you've got Zephon down the bottom, and then you've got the Allergenco version up top. So they've got an adhesive on them, and they're very clean. They're great for us in the lab. Now, the difference between them, this is going to be hard because it's got a piece on it. Now, the Allergenco type is very flexible. It's thin. It's very thin. So it's a bit more friendly when it comes to that, and its adhesive is tacky, not like super glue like the Zephon one. So the Zephon one will pull paint off every day of the week, but it's not as, it's a bit more rigid. It doesn't bend as well. So it really comes down to preference, that one. But both of those are probably the better option. Equal, I wouldn't say one's better than the other. It really comes down to how you feel about it. When it comes to the difference between sellotape, so clear sellotape, not frosted, it has to be very clear, no funny frosting on it. You can put that straight onto a Glad wrap bag if you felt like it, and then we can pull it off the Glad wrap bag and stick it onto a microscope slide, just like we do with the air samples. Or if you happen to have slides yourself, you can put it on there and label it just like you would with the blue stickers. So okay. no different with that one.
But no swabs.
Swabs. Okay, so swabs, we do have to, so what we do with the swab, I haven't even got one to show you, but what we do is we use sellotape for that one. I don't like swabs. I'll tell you why in a minute. But what you'll do is we'll have this, my hand being the sticky tape, and we'll roll the swab on it. So you can't get a count because the swab area doesn't translate onto the tape. So even if someone tries to count that, it's inaccurate. You can do spores per swab and get a pretty good idea, hoping that a lot of it's transferred over. However, what swabs also do, and why we don't like them for this particular scenario. Now, if you were to grow it, if you were to cultivate it, perfect, do that. that's perfect, but not for this. But that's how we would do it in that fashion there. If we weren't to grow it, we would roll it on there. But us rolling it on there and the swabbing process destroys the growth structures. So all that hyphae and stuff that helps us in the lab to identify what's going on is broken, distorted, and of no value to us. Now, it will still have the spores on it, and we might still be able to tell you what's going on and the general coverage and things like that. However, the true value of its character is broken away. So we wouldn't be able to comment very well on evidences of growth, other than the fact that there's maybe a lot of spores to suggest that there would have been a lot of growth in the area sampled. Does that help?
Yeah, because last time I sent a swab in, it said 0 of everything. Like, I mean, I could tell that there was something going on the like base plates I was swabbing.
Yep. Did you get a debris count though? Like, did you get an idea of how heavy the debris was?
No, nothing.
Oh,
and
okay.
the swab, like, I swabbed it and it was clearly like
darkened.
Darkened, yes.
Yeah. You just reminded me of something that might be of value to you. What I'll try and do is try and find it. Heck, I might be able to do this right now. Come on, show me. Yeah, swabs are good for if you plan on growing it, but not for microscopy. It's just not your friend when it comes to that, I'm afraid. I'm just trying to find a picture to show you the actual size of a swab. Maybe in sampling. Yeah, beautiful. Cool. All right, I'm going to just share my screen again. Zoom. Share screen. 2. So this here is a swab when we cut it open, if we choose to cut it open. But the reason I did this was to show you the physical size, that square that you would normally sample, being 100 square centimeters. You would run your swab over it, you roly-poly it around, you go backwards and forwards, zigzag up and down, left, right. But the physical size of the swab is much, much smaller than the 100 square centimeters you're trying to sample. If the surface that you're trying to sample has a lot of debris on it, that swab is full very early on, and anything you sample after that at some unknown number of distance or area, it'll be full and show you no extra value. So if it is reported in 100 per 100 centimeters squared, if you get a report that says that, it's very unlikely that that be a true number that you can rely on, because the surface area of the cotton is at best 2.5 centimeters squared, at best. Now, if it's ultra clean, you know, you're talking about a hospital or something like that, you might get value from that, but generally it's way too small for the amount of area that you sample. So if you were to sample a smaller area, 25 by 25, it might be more justified. But yeah, that's a limitation for the swab. Yeah. Sorry, hang on. I'm just going to go to the chat. What have we got? Which is, why is the aerosol expiry date so short? Does it matter? I don't think it does, personally. However, if you're at a lab that does record the expiry date, it matters, because legally that becomes a bit of a shifty thing. Our lab, we don't record it or mention anything about the expiry date. Now, should we? Probably. But I'm yet to see one that has been bad. I've actually got some aerosols that I haven't opened up yet that are 2.5 years old. So I'm curious, that have been sampled, like it got sample on it, to see if it maybe grows. Because if it grows, then you go, okay, there's a set amount of time from which you take the sample. to when you need to analyze it before it becomes a problem. So the other part where it does maybe matter is if it's seen very extreme climates, hot, cold, it may change the viscosity of that gel, compromising it. But you could argue then that one summer's day is bad and then the expiry date is irrelevant again. So there's that. Emma, with fibers, skin cells, fiberglass, etc., that show up other than the aerosol interpretation guideline that EAA, issued, are there any guidelines? No, it is a very good guideline, Emma. She keeps on writing, are you aware to suggest what is elevated count or what is considered normal? Yeah, so kind of, yes. There's enough data out there to know what is typical or atypical for an outdoor air, and that's within that guideline, that same guideline. It's a very powerful. If you don't have it, I really strongly suggest you do get that. Let me see if I can, if I have it really quickly to show you. And that's not it. Yeah, this one. Okay, so I'll just open this up and we can have a look at it together. Now, this is really valuable, but it is to do with the US market, and some people will argue that it's not valuable to the Australian market. However, what I've been able to notice so far is that it has a lot of correlation in what it's showing. So sorry, Paul, I scroll really fast and make your eyes go funny. I'm trying to get to in this document where there is, so you can see here different percentiles of what's typical or quote unquote normal. Now, a better language to use is typical or atypical, not normal or abnormal. Just to let you know, so typical, atypical, even elevated's a bit of a questionable one. So, we'll continue on.
What is the name of those guidelines, Bryan?
Yeah, so this is what page 112. I'll scroll all the way up. This is it here. Environmental Analysis Associates Incorporated. So that's Dan Baxter's business. Airborne and Surface Dust Analysis Interpretation Guideline.
Is that what's been attached in the chat, is it?
No. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
No, that's okay. It's free. You don't have to pay for it. It's a super good one to have. Pollen. Here's a mold. Yeah, this is the guideline. However, the 2021 study that he did showed it way better in a much nicer way. It's on his website too, but I don't think I have it right here for us to bring up. But either way, okay, so we're going to look at, ignore the surface counts. Now, this is where I disagree with it. However, if you do get counts, you can use this as a reference. But you can see why I don't like surfaces. I don't think you need to be a mycologist to understand why numbers don't really hold as much value on a surface. However, airborne counts per meter cubed. This is a study he's done of typical and atypical stuff for a few hundred samples. So it's statistically significant enough to use as a guide. So you start to get atypical at 1600 spores, no matter what it is. That's when it starts to get a bit funny, okay? Doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's when it's funny. So it really depends on your hypothesis. Now, if your hypothesis is that you're sampling inside of a hospital, 1600 is extraordinarily unacceptable, okay? But if this 1600 is compared to a house that's completely open, all the windows are open, the air is breezing through it, and you're just getting nothing but outside air, you kind of go, well, that's all right. It's not a big deal. So it depends on what your hypothesis is. That's critical. So I would say that 1600 as a general rule of thumb is not a bad number. He, though, in in another study, like in the 2021 study. Yeah, in the 2021 study, he highlighted the percentages of Aspergillus penicillium and also for tertiary colonizers. So that's your Stachybotrys catoniums. So that's the pictures that we've got here. Down the bottom, you've got your aspen type. These are poo photos, but anyway, Stachy, Catonium, Trichoderma as well. There's a tertiary colonizer. So these ones, that one and that one. Alternaria can be considered maybe, sometimes tertiary. It falls across all three. So there are three colonizing types for fungi. There's primary, secondary, tertiary, and they speak to the amount of water that the material has experienced, substrate. So the more water, it becomes a tertiary colonizer. So that falls in line with your Stachybotrys, Catonium, and your Trichodermas typically. Aspen can fall in all three of those categories, but starts to pop up most prevalently in the secondary, so slightly less water. But that's a story for another day. So anyway, there is a study that he's got. Close current tab. And so that's a choice for you to follow. However, I quite like it. It's more up to date than the Australian Mould Guideline, and the Australian Mould Guideline does okay. It does okay. The wording of it's not awesome, but English isn't Heike's first language, so she did well either way. So it's 8 o'clock. I know I don't want to keep you for too much longer. Like I said, I'll chew your ear off. Let me just check, just in case there's some more chats going on that I haven't checked in on. I've got to stop. Do I have to stop to see it? No, chat. Here we go. That's Emma's question. Cool. All right. So this is our lab report. If you care to know, we're Oceanic Laboratory Initiative. Well, I say we. Now it's just me. Victoria's now gone. She left me. But this is how we present our air sample report. This is a dummy report, so I don't need to hide anyone's data. This is actually a sample that Jordan sent through, and I've just stolen a lot of pictures and stuff like that from it. So what we do here is we have the classical. Can you see my mouse at all? You can? Cool. All right, cool. So we'll start at the top. Lab number, that's just our ID. That's air 1. Oh, yeah, don't do that. That's a bad thing. Sample number 9. Sample name, so that's just the name of it. So that's outdoor air. That's the same as what's on your chain of custody. Now the sample volume here, if you all know, 5 liters, so 5 minutes of sampling times 15 liters, which is the fixed amount of air that gets drawn through, that's set by, so you can't ever change it for these types of cassettes. They operate at 15 liters a second. You can't change that ever. If you do, you're compromising everything and it's not going to be accurate to its design. So 5 times 15 is 75. So that's the amount of liters that it's drawn in. What happens then is we do an algorithm multiplication depending on how many fields of view we look at. So that's the up and down parts that I was telling you about when we look at the air sample. How many of those we do times the volume of air, and then we extrapolate that out to be a meter cubed, which is this number down the bottom. Or for the individual genus right there. So you can sample more or less, depends on your own preference and what scenarios you think's going on, your hypothesis and everything like that. Often, I would never suggest to exceed 6 liters, because then the sample becomes very crowded and difficult to look at. And so then the confidence level in the results sometimes can become really bad. If it's a really clean environment, you can do 10 liters if you feel like it. If it's a hospital, go for it. Do 10. You could probably do 20 if you felt like it, and not compromise the sample. Then we've got the type of cassette. Yes.
Minutes? Did you mean minutes or liters just then?
Both. because the amount of air you draw in, the speed in which you draw air doesn't change. So if you sample for longer, you're sampling for more liters. So time and liters are proportional to that 15 liters a second that it draws through.
Bryan,
Yes.
with the extrapolation,
Yes.
if you pick up, a nasty genre, but only see like one spore and then extrapolate it times 13 or something, but somewhere else on the slide that you didn't look, there might be a whole bunch of them hiding. Does that happen?
Yes, yeah, that can happen, but that's why we look at a large percentage of that. So we look at 53% generally. So our rule of thumb, to let you know, just our own stuff. Oh, this is our rule of thumb is in the first two traces. Let me just stop for a sec. If our first two traces, we've got the rectangle. If our first two passes find nothing on the sample at all, no mold, should I say, we will count the entire 100% of that deposit. So we will go through the whole thing. However, if the sample has fungi within the first two, now this is just our protocol, just to let you know, not other labs don't necessarily do this. But if there is found to be some mold in the first two, we will do 50%, no less, unless there is heaps of spores. And then we'll put what's called a stop count in. So we have what's called a Poisson graph. Now, a Poisson graph is a graph where we record. It's just a bell curve. It's not center. It's not 50% right down the middle. It's slightly elongated to find the average of how many spores before the data means nothing. It's pretty much the gist of what that Poisson does. So at the bell curve starting to go down, where it cuts off at the 75%, that last 75% to the 100% is we ignore that, which puts us at about 50% of looking at the sample for ourselves in our lab. So that last 70%, not a lot changes. Yes, there could very well be something in there. However, we hope to capture it in that 50% where not much will change. So the impact to your analysis will be minimal. We could do 100% of the slide, absolutely, by request, but the time to do that is quite expounding. Let's put it that way. That the cost to benefit ratio is kind of no longer as advantageous. Does that help clarify what that is?
Yeah. And how long after you write your report do you throw out the samples if someone gets a phone call and has to count it again,
Yeah, sure. So our rule is to hold it for a week. So you have a week to come back and ask the question again. The problem, though, I'll let you know, and this is across every laboratory, doesn't matter who, this for an air sample, they degrade. They almost start degrading immediately. So you can have, so we have measurements of uncertainty between an analysts. For myself, I've just got to test myself multiple times on the same slide, but that's the difference, plus or minus, that there might be some variation. What happens very quickly, and we've done side-by-side tests with other laboratories for proficiency, the sample itself starts to degrade, and what a spore that was stained beforehand and more easily seen becomes unseen, or the liquid starts to peel away from the center of the slide. It just doesn't hold. It's sort of what I'm saying. It physically doesn't hold its form for very long. So yes, we can look at it after a week, but I almost guarantee you that the numbers, the actual numbers will be the same. The ID could potentially be very similar, and the proportions could be very similar, but I would suggest that the numbers would change. Yeah.
Do you do like a rough scan of the whole slide and choose the densest area?
No. No. So we do that for surfaces, yes, but that's because we're not counting, as I've tried to highlight before. But for air samples, no, we're looking at 50%. So what we're trying to do is start from where it begins. So the outside part of it, if we're looking at the rectangle, we start on the outside here and we make our way through it up to 50%, in the hopes that the other 50%, statistically they are very similar to that 75%, where there's 25% of all samples that might be slightly different, but the outcome doesn't really change too great. So we look at 50%. And so that's a uniform way. However, if we started somewhere in the middle, it's not a fair representation of the entire deposit, because as I showed you, it feathers out. So it becomes unhomogeneous at that point. And so for us to only look at a really solid part would be biasing the count to a really high count potentially. Does that help? Is that clear?
Yeah, I do.
Cool.
Are there stats? Have people tested that and like actually counted the whole slide and seen if the numbers doing 100% of the slide versus 50% work out to be the same roughly?
So that's where the Poisson chart comes in, and that's part of the ASTM. We haven't spoken about the standards. Now, if I was to show you my screen again, sorry if I'm holding everyone up. And you can go if you want, and just flick me some questions. I'm happy to answer. But I keep going down. Okay, so here we have the analysis method for the air. Most labs now, not about 2 years ago, and even still some labs don't do it, but this is the internationally recognized standard for looking at air samples on, and this is a standard. So I sit on this committee as well, and we review air quality standards, and this is just one of them. So the ASTM D7391, currently the 2020 revision, that's what the 20 is on the end. That most laboratories will use for air. Surfaces is where labs very much differentiate. So they have their own standard, their own D7 standard as well, which I can show you. So most labs, according to that standard, will have this Poisson data that talks about the uniformity, and that you can stop counting at about 300 spores, and the overall outcome of the sample doesn't change. But yeah, there's been enough studies to suggest that it's quite similar. But you know, you can, if you want to, like I said, request it, but it'll probably come at an extra cost, because in that standard, it only requires a lab to look at 20% of a sample, which I don't like, for the same reason as we spoke about how it feathers off in the sample. You either take it at 50%, in my opinion, or you do 100%. That's the only two options for me in our lab, because if you start to pick and choose that 20%, that difference can be quite huge, in my opinion. So check, and how you'll know this, how you will know is through the limit of reporting. So no matter what lab you use, they will have a limit of reporting. Now, I have called out 2 different labs, I'm not going to name their names, where their limit of reportings were incorrect. So I know that doesn't offer a great amount of confidence, but this is where you check it, the limit of reporting, this number here, and that is the multiplication of how many spores is required. So to get the meter cubed, you have to times it by 25. It's pretty much the gist of what, there's a few ones and zeros, decimal places and things like that. But at 53%, as we do it, at 53% of the sample that we look at the magnification that we look at it on the microscope, so that matters, and the amount of air that was taken in, the multiplication for that is 25. Now, I will show you one where I've changed it to, hopefully, got it here. Here we go. So the kitchenette one here. So you can see here the sample volume is 45 liters a second, not your 75 like this one over here, which is 5 minutes. This is 3 minutes. So 3 times 15, right? So the limit of reporting goes up to 53 because less air was taken and we have to multiply it more. So the coefficient there changes to a much greater one. And inversely, if you sampled more, so the closer you are to 1,000 liters, the less multiplication that needs to happen. But that's how you will tell if a lab's hopefully done it right. It's that limit of reporting. Does that help? So in general, the rule of thumb, it should be pretty close to 25. At 100% of the sample, it's about 11, 12. And depending on the laboratory and if they do how many traces, they might do 1 or 2 less. That number might be, it's in the low teens, let's put it that way. And then we've got a debris. So that's a requirement under the ASTM to comment on. Keep double clicking, terrible idea. The debris number, I'll bring you back down to show you. So according to the ASTM here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They have categories, and this is the percentage of coverage of debris. Just to give you an idea, I disagree with some parts of it because I think that this group here, number 3, is 25 to 75% coverage is a whole heap. That's a very big category. So I think that should be split in half. Yeah. And so the higher the debris, the more difficult it is to analyze, just to let you know, because there's more stuff covering stuff. Next, we've got epithelial cells. Not every lab will do epithelial cells. Now that is skin cells, animal or human, doesn't matter. But you can see here, as I showed you in one of those samples, that's the blue. That's these things here. And that gives you an idea of the cleanliness of the property in an air sample, especially. Or it speaks to how much you scratched your head next to the sample and you should have been standing away when you did it. So that's for the consultant to know, because you might go into a house that's got bad housekeeping, but you don't know how to say it. Let the lab say it. Let the lab say it for you. Now, how many is too many? Good question. Depends on your hypothesis. Again, if you're in a hospital, you don't really want many, if any at all. But if you're going into a hoarder's house, you would expect that it'd be high. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? That's up to you to figure out, but it's definitely going to have to be a particulate that someone's nose has to filter. So that'll trigger someone's allergies or something like that. Whether, because there's some instances where people will go, I'm sick from mold. That may partly be true, but they also have to combat and filter out their own skin cells because they don't keep a clean enough house. So that has a trigger as well. I'll take us back up to the outside air one. So you will have, if you've ever seen a lab report before, you would have seen this chart. The raw count is how many spores we actually counted. The concentration is the multiplication, so the 25 times this number. Now, like I said, there are some decimals in there, so it's not perfectly 25. And then there's the percentage of the genus within this sample. So in this air sample for the outside air, 27% of that's ascospores, 4% aspergillus, and it goes down. Then we have the general chart here for the percentages of what's made up of it, just for reference. But the important one is this one over here. So it's comparing the outdoor air control, or whatever your control is. In this instance, it's an outdoor air, outdoors. And you have your chart as per normal. Now you can just look at the chart and be free to do that if you want to. We also include an image, a representative image, so you have an idea of what we saw, of what that is. Now, we can't share every image because there would be 1,000. So we just take one. But down here is where it compares numbers for numbers. The control being A1 in this instance. So you'll see here, A1, top. A1 to A2. So the concentration of these light blue graphs. So you can see it's just over 2,000 here. So that's just over 2,000, and then 2,500 just up there. So that's what they are. So you can side by side see really quickly, is the indoors more than the outdoors? If that's what your basic question is, you can see it quickly. Now this bar here shows you that how similar it is. So this is a similarity index. It's a little bit nerdy, quite an algorithm, but it's based off the Bray-Curtis index. If you ever care for what that is, feel free to look it up, but that's what was, the algorithm was used. So this calculation was used to determine if a particular group of trees was similar in one environment to another environment, and if they have any relationship. So what this compares is to see if there's a relationship with outdoors or your other control, wherever your control was taken. Is there a relationship with this sample or not? This one has a 20% correlation. It's not similar at all. So you can go, okay, it's got more spores and it's nothing like outdoors. I've probably got a problem before you even start looking at these numbers. So you can see really quickly in a graph and start to know if you need to start investigating deeper. And then you can go down and have a look and you'll go, oh, 20% aspen, only 4 over there. That's weird. Okay, cool. Now you don't need to know these spores here. Now these spores in this particular image is cladosporium, not cladosporium, Chitomium, right there. But you don't need to know that. This is just to represent it. If you know it, then great, congratulations. It's more kudos to you. But you can come in here and you can see Chitomium, where there's no Chitomium in the outdoor air sample, and it makes up 40% of this sample, which is massive. Because this should be no more than 2% kind of scenario. Depending on your guideline or your references, I can't tell you what it is, but that's your job. But I can tell you now that 40% is not normal. It is not typical. So that is atypical. So you have more spores, completely dissimilar, and it's atypical in every manner to the outdoor air sample. So this is how we present those. Any questions on the airs before I finish us before 8:30 on the surfaces? No? Okay. Unless there's something in chat and I haven't seen that. Chat. No, we're still good. Okay. So we'll go down to...
What's the name again of the, not the algorithm, but what tells you... Like
sure. Yep, so that's called the Bray-Curtis index. There are other similarity indexes. So if you were to just look up a similarity index, there's about 3 common ones, but the general gist of it is that they bring out a percentage of similarity to whatever you're trying to compare it to.
Thanks.
No problem. But we do the calculation for you. Then there's a summary. That's no big deal. Now the surfaces. To get back to what we were talking about. Now these are good examples again of how impossible it is to actually count. Okay. In this one here, this is going to be a bad photo because it's downsized for the PDF. But you've got a lot of trichoderma in this one. And trichoderma, they clump together really tightly. You can't count this on a good day at all. So we don't do that. Now what we do is we follow the ASTM for surface sampling. So I'll scroll down really quick to that just to show you. Is the D7658, and that was in a revision in 2017. So that's probably coming up. But again, it uses the coverage 0 to 5, and these are the percentages. Like I told you, the 3% is a ginormous, it's 50% difference from in a 3, so it can mean almost anything. There are guidelines from NICOSH, NYCOSH, and they have 3 categories that say something similar to what this is, and it helps us, and I'll show you how it converts to an IICRC rating of conditions 1, 2, and 3. But we have the 5% to 25%. That's the same as the NICOSH level 2, where it says that there's a possible contamination, and then 25 to 100% of coverage is probable contamination. But the ASTM breaks it down into 5. But just to let you know that there is another guideline out there that tells you, just on percentages alone, whether something is suggested to be contaminated. But from that, we take that same mentality and we put it into words what the IICRC condition is. So anyway, we'll start from the top. S1, sample, surface sample 1, the location, the debris load, so how much debris we saw as a percentage. So that 1, of course, is 0 to 5%. A fungal loading of 4. So that's 75 to 90% coverage of fungal associated coverage. So it's pretty dense. Evidences of growth, seen. We just put seen. Some labs will put, we saw conidial head, we saw clusters or chains of spores. Some will also say hyphal fragments or hyphae, because hyphae is the growth. Fragments you'll more so find if it's broken up, if someone's cleaned it or in an air sample. So because of the fungal coverage at a 4 and evidence is seen, we get an IICRC condition 3. Now, to get familiar with the IICRC, we'll scroll back down again. We have these here. Now, these are word descriptions of what classifies these things. It's not a number, where some guidelines will offer numbers. However, this talks about the characteristic of it. Now, I've shown you in the previous samples the character of it. And this is why it's really important when you're trying to convert it to an IICRC standard, because these words matter. Now, I don't fully like these words, but they give us the gist of what's going on. You know, like normal ecology. It's an ugly term, and that's where it should be typical, atypical. So this is a typical, shouldn't be ecology, because ecology takes in a whole bunch of other organisms. But a typical presentation, and that can include some settled spores, some fungal fragments, traces of actual growth. So that's traces. And you might ask how we differentiate what's a trace, and we do that by the coverage. So we use the ASTM coverage, and we have a decision tree that if it's covered by too much of it, then it gets elevated. Condition 2, settled spores directly or indirectly from a condition 3 area may also have traces of actual growth. Same as a 1, but it's atypical, you know, because it doesn't say normal here, right? So it's atypical. It's when it starts to go a little bit funny. Again, how we do it is we have a decision tree that leverages the ASTM's coverage. So too much coverage means that it's atypical. And then, of course, a 3 is where it's loaded. So you can definitely see that there's a contamination there on that surface. Okay, so if you're not familiar with those, feel free to get familiar with those. Now, these are suggestions from us. These conditions, these are our suggestions. You don't need to accept that. You can, because you might understand that that's different for whatever reason, that it might be typical because, I don't know, it's timber inside of a boat. And you go, well, we're going to get mold there. Is it okay? Now, that's a different question. There's a difference between acceptable and normal, and they are different. Right, that's again a conversation for another day. We'll look at sample 3 here, where it's slightly different. Okay, so this we've determined as a condition 2, because quite likely, anyway, is that the fungal coverage is a 2. So that's 5 to 25%. Now, this one could easily, by any consultant's terms, be deemed unacceptable. and I wouldn't disagree with you. However, from a lab side of stuff, we've got to draw a line somewhere. These black things, they are they're an Aspergillus type, but they're not Aspergillus completely. But just to let you know, it doesn't really, you don't really need to know that, but it's an evidence of growth. And then you've got a little cotomium here, and then aspen going around through there and other things. So there can be evidences seen, but because the coverage is kind of low, we've determined it to be a condition 2. But this might be in a hospital, and it is very un-okay to have a condition 2 in a hospital. Yeah, I'll always use these examples because it's the most extreme. These are other evidences of growth, right? You can see here, this is penicillium. Looks like a paintbrush. That's what penicillium means. Penny. Yeah. Any questions on how we do that for ourselves? I'm happy to comment on other lab reports too, by the way. If you have questions on how they go about things, I can try and add some context. But I'll stop sharing unless you have a question more specifically.
Bryan, can I ask?
Yes, always.
With a EML, with the limit of reporting, I sort of just did a back-end calculation and came up with 13 for an air sample. What's your comment on that?
I mentioned that there were a couple of labs that don't have limit of reporting that would stand up. That's one of them. I have spoken directly with them. I've sat around a table with them about it, and discussed this with them. But because their lab protocol was written and determined in the US, they're not allowed to change it here in Australia. But they're now bought by Eurofins, and to let everyone know the future of what's going to happen with that. So I've spoken with Kira about this, and also the AML guys at a conference recently. They're going to slowly be changing into a Eurofins report. So it won't be the same, but they're doing it slowly. So you might see, if you have an old report and a newer report, you might see some of the language has changed. The emojis disappear, that sort of thing. That's because it's becoming more like a laboratory, not offering any interpretation or emphasis on anything in particular. Yeah.
Thanks.
That's okay.
Well, thank you very much. Bryan. That was awesome.
Happy. If you have any other questions or whatever, you might dream of me, and that's okay. Just throw it my way. I'm free and breezy, open, but I'm not on Facebook as much as